So as he said, I'm Lynn DeRose, and I've been at GE Research for about 25 years now. My background is actually chemistry, and I'm not working in chemistry anymore at the Research Center, but I did start out in the chemistry field there. I'm now working in the area of sensors and sensor-enabled equipment. And so I'm going to talk to you about the GE barbecue experience at South by Southwest, but I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about smart machines and what GE is doing in that area. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday, I was in the breakout group that was talking about the future of where we want to go. What is the strategy of high computer programming, high performance computing? And one of the things that kept coming up was behavior and changing people's behavior. And I found that really interesting because I didn't expect to come to this meeting and talk about changing people's behavior and how we could possibly do that. And yet that's what we spent yesterday talking about. And talking to the other people that are, big companies like GE, they're having some of the same problems that we are. These kids are graduating from school and they're wanting to go and work at the cool tech companies. They want to work at Google, they want to work at Uber, they want to work at Facebook, they want to work at Amazon, all these really cool companies, right? But in reality, the cool companies that you really want to work at, the engineering companies, are things like the Procter & Gamble's and the GEs of the world. And how are you going to draw these kids into you? So as I go through this, keep that in mind as how GE is working to try to draw those kids back into things in places like General Electric Company. So I'm going to first tell you a little bit about GE Research. I originally wasn't, but then I realized over the past 2 days talking to people on Monday night and on Tuesday that there's a lot of people that don't understand the role of the research center at GE. So this is what GE looks like today. These are our various different businesses. So we have power and water that does steam turbines, gas turbines, and generators. We have oil and gas, which is the business that does blowout preventers and subsea machinery. Aviation is the business that builds our airplane engines. Transportation builds locomotives. Energy management, that's our transmission and distribution. Healthcare does imaging, and we have a whole suite of software tools. We're very heavy in healthcare in software. So software tools that help to optimize your hospitals and your facilities and run the things like MRIs, CAT scans. Our home and business solutions, that's our light bulb industry. And then GE Capital, which is our financial arm. Most of you have probably heard that we have gotten rid of part of it. We've recently sold part of it. We sold only our real estate part of the GE Capital business. We have not sold the rest of it, and we are right now keeping the rest of that business. So GE Global Research is where I work. We were the first industrial lab in the United States. The research that we do at the Research Center is primarily applied research. We do very little basic research. It's mostly applied for all of our different businesses that I just told you about in that previous slide. And at the Research Center, we do work for all of those businesses. On any given day, you could be having a meeting with any one of the leaders who come to the Research Center, explain their problems to you, and you try to figure out how you might be able to help any one of those businesses. The site that I'm at was built in 1910, so it's over 100 years old right now. It is the headquarters, and it is in upstate New York, and that's Niskayuna, New York, right by Albany. But between 2000 and 2009, we built a site in Bangalore, India, Shanghai, China, Munich, Detroit, Michigan, and 2 technology centers in Russia and Japan. And then most recently, from 2010 until now, we built a large software center out in San Ramon, California, and a technology center in Brazil that is focused on oil and gas. And we've opened another technology center in Israel, which is focused on security. So we've now got 8 research centers around the globe, and we're still the headquarters there, but we're constantly working between all of the different sites. And this is how global research works. So when an idea or a problem comes up from the business, we'll have sort of a brainstorm. We do things at the research center to kind of discover how we might be able to solve these problems. We'll do some development. We'll usually do a proof of concept and a pilot. And then that's really where the bulk of the work from GE Global Research is, and then it falls off from there. Okay, at that point, if we've proved out an ROI to our business, because it is all about the business model, without business model, the business isn't going to take it over, then the business will take it over from there. We'll stay on with them. We'll help them transition it to this commercial product. We'll answer questions, do tests if they need it. But they primarily take over from there, and they form the commercial product. So we're the one branch in GE we're not a P&L. We don't sell anything. We get our funding either from the businesses when they have a problem, or corporate, or by going after external funding. So we're not a P&L, and that's primarily the way we work. So anybody have any questions about how GE Global Research operates? Okay, then I suppose you really do want to hear about barbecue, right? So South by Southwest. Most people would say, why is GE at South by Southwest? That is the most unlikely venue that GE is going to be at. And so let me explain. At South by Southwest, they're a very large company that they do conferences, they put on trade shows, they put on festivals, and in Austin every year they have this 10-day event. And it started out in music, so maybe 3 or 4 days of music. Then they added film to it, 3 or 4 days of film. Then they added interactive to it, 3 or 4 days of interactive. And these things overlap, but they don't go on for the whole 10 days. So interactive was a 3-day period in which GE set up shop for 3 days at South by Southwest with barbecue. And the focus of South by Southwest are innovative entrepreneurs. So if you think about innovative entrepreneurs, you think about how these entrepreneurs are going off on their own or going to these companies like Google. Where can you go that you can get a lot of entrepreneurs and kind of pique their interest about what is it that GE is doing? South by Southwest was a great venue for that. So this was our barbecue research site, and this building in particular is a horse and buggy, the old horse and buggies that used to go around town. It's a horse and buggy stable. It actually was torn down the day after we left, which was just crazy to me. But it was torn down. GE went in there, and GE Marketing, let me say GE Marketing went in there. And it was amazing. They cut down trees, they took down shrubs and plants, they painted this building inside and out. They put a new roof on this building. They put in new windows. They built that stage on the far right. They built all of those tables and benches. They put up a split rail fence, which you can't see because it's in front of here. That little bit of metal you see here is the cooker that we're talking about. They built laboratories inside, put in a sound system. Over here, like where you can't see, there's another stage, but it wasn't really a stage. It was a beer site, beer tent. And they did all of this in 2 days. All of it in 2 days. It was amazing how they transformed this in 2 days. They even trucked in that sand that you see there on the bottom, that crushed stone. So they took that whole thing from a building that was being torn down, and they turned it into this BBQ Research Center. And at the BBQ Research Center, there were 4 main things that they offered. So they offered, first of all, liquid nitrogen ice cream. So people could go, they could get liquid nitrogen made ice cream. They flavored it with wasabi, or they flavored it with, they called it barbecue glass. They took the rendered fat from the barbecue, and they had it very, very thin, and it tasted like barbecue, but it was very thin like glass. And then they had like a graham cracker one that people tried and chose their favorite. They had to make your own barbecue sauce. So for that, they set up a laboratory setting. They had the actual, chemistry, stainless steel tables. They had the chemistry stools. They had everybody started out with a big flask of ketchup was their base. And then at each table, they had probably 20 different ingredients from honey to Worcestershire sauce to garlic and peppers and hot peppers, and people could make their own barbecue sauce, and then they packaged it up and took it away with them. So they were talking to them about food chemistry. Then they had your brain on barbecue. And what you see there is Rebecca Jarvis of the ABC News. She came in one day and was interviewing the people. So that's our brain scientist, and Rebecca Jarvis there. She's taking the test right now. And then the main centerpiece of it was this giant 15-foot smoker. So I'll talk first about your brain on barbecue and what we saw there. So first of all, what are brainwaves? You know, our brain, no matter what we're doing, whether we're sleeping or thinking or talking or relaxing or dancing, our brain is constantly throwing off electrical stimulations, and they are easily measured using an EEG. So once you measure them and detect them, there's about 5 different categories that you can put them in, and that is the gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. So the highest frequency ones are your gamma waves at the top, and those are when you are really doing some learning, thinking, complex thinking, processing information. Those are the kind of waves you'll see. The beta waves are ones that are you're also thinking, but not quite so deeply, not so intensely. Alpha waves are when you're relaxed, and then theta waves, delta waves, those are when you're meditating, doing yoga, sleeping, dreaming. Those kind of waves. So what do you think which brainwaves might you think we saw? Beta and alpha. Good thoughts. We did see some alpha. I'll tell you about those in a second. But up here on the top is what you see our setup to look like. If you can see on that table that's there, those are the Muse headbands. They had 5 EEG sensors on them. There's 3 EEG sensors in the front, 2 EEG sensors in the back. Not the best mode of measuring brain waves, but the best mode at an event like this, right? You had 8 people at a table. They were all, sitting down facing each other. Put these on. It was very fast to be able to put these EEG sensors to the people. And then they ate either spicy coleslaw, a tangy coleslaw, smoked sausage, or a sweet smoked banana pudding. And then they compared what the brain waves looked at each one of those. So as you said, we saw some beta waves for certain. We also saw some gamma waves for certain for people who were really thinking about this. We saw alpha, you're right. We saw alpha, and we determined that those were the ones that had been drinking beer outside for a long time. Yeah, those nice alpha waves, they were really calm. But a lot of the people displayed more beta and gamma, and that makes a little bit of sense because we sort of set them up to be thinking about this, right? We set them up, a lot of these people came, it's the first time they ever saw their own brain waves. So they came there wondering, what do my brain waves look like, And then they were thinking the whole time, are they really different when I taste these different food? And it's like, no, actually, they really weren't different when they tasted the different food. But that's not unexpected either. So, they were in an environment as well where it was extremely loud, it was extremely busy, people were milling around them all the time. There was make your own barbecue sauce behind them, make your liquid nitrogen ice cream over to the side of them. So there was a lot of distractions when we were doing this. So to see beta and gamma waves was nothing that we were really surprised at. But the experiment was, 30 minutes, one person each for 30 minutes. It wasn't a very controlled experiment, obviously. It was more fun for the people that were there. And the truth is that it was okay with us that it wasn't a controlled experiment because GE wasn't really interested in how people's brains react to barbecue, right? This is really what GE's interest in brain research is. The brain is one of the least understood organs in the body, and we are really interested in building the next generation of imaging and scanning technologies so that we can help people who are doing brain research map the brain in minute detail. So what we did is when these people had these brain scans on, these muse on their heads, it's a perfect opportunity for this captive audience, for our barbecue scientists there, to talk to them about what is it that GE's really doing in imaging, what are they doing in MRIs, what are they doing to help people with brain research, and hopefully get these young kids that were there thinking like, oh, this is really cool. I would like to do this kind of work with GE. So it was, yeah, sure, they're there and they're having a blast with it, but marketing used this as a way to be able to talk to them about the technology that's going on and try to bring them over and join GE. Look, see if you want to work for GE Healthcare. So it was a really, I think, a really brilliant way of reaching quite a few people. So our super smoker, GE went out and hired a third party to build a super smoker. So that is what they did. This was a 15-foot super smoker. It had in it ridiculous things. It had in it windows. See those circles there? Those are ports. So those are windows. Where you see those fins coming out on the left, is there a pointer up here? Is this a laser? Okay, so these were the windows. These are fins, okay? They had a light inside, so you could climb up the ladder and look inside. But seriously, it's full of smoke. You didn't see much. This here at the bottom, this was a 21 cubic foot firebox. So this is a vertical smoker. These are diffusion baffles, so that baffled the smoke going up and it filled the cavity nicely. So it's 15 feet tall. And when they went out and they first asked them to build them a smoker, you know, most smokers are not vertical smokers. Most smokers are horizontal smokers, and there's a reason for that, right? So when you're smoking meat, you want the smoke to come across, and it comes across and it splits, and it smokes both sides of your meat at the same time. When you have a vertical smoker, the smoke goes up, and you've got meat on a shelf, and the smoke hits it, and it goes around it, and you don't get the nice bark that you really want on your smoke, right? So a vertical smoker is not really the best way to smoke meat. So when they first got this third party came back with this beautiful horizontal smoker, and they wanted, GE to look at it, and GE said, are you kidding me? I want this to look like a GE engine. I don't want this to be horizontal. You got to grow this thing big and tall. So they sent them back, and they came back with this thing that looked like a rocket ship. It was just this amazing piece of instrument. And just so you get the idea of how big 15 feet is, right? So a Cornish game hen, it's about 2 feet, and then a domestic pig, 3.5, 4. I'm 5 feet tall. That's Holstein, 5 to 6 feet, a Holstein cow. So like 3 of me is this smoker. And if you remember from this picture, right? So this is where you put the meat. 6 feet off the ground, okay? So this was really an experience for certain. And this is the smoker in all of its glory. You can see that the only way that we could actually use a smoker is by getting on it with a ladder. So that's Evan Leroy, and he is the pit master at Friedman's in Austin, Texas. That's me. We're very early morning here checking the meat that's been in all night long. The smoker itself had 7 sensors. It had 3 chamber temperatures, 2 meat sensors, 1 smoke velocity, 1 relative humidity. And then it had these 3 vertical displays, also set up by marketing, right next to it, just off the picture that you see there, displaying all the real-time data. And it was real-time data. We didn't save it. It was they were unable to save it, but you could see what was going on, the chamber temperatures in the top, meat at the bottom, and the velocity and the humidity at the top, the chamber temperatures in the middle, sorry. So we actually cooked meat here. We cooked a lot of meat. We cooked ribs. Those are the ribs that you see a picture of. we cooked brisket, chicken, sausage, tofu, and beets in this cooker every day. The plan was, the way we did this is we seasoned it first thing in the morning, and then at 6 p.m. we put it in the smoker, and we kept the smoker at a constant temperature between around 180 to 200, and then at midnight we took the smoker, all the meat out, the briskets out, and we wrapped the briskets, and then we put the briskets back in, and then after we put them back in, we cranked the temperature up to around 350, 400, because they weren't going to burn, wrapped in the foil. And we went and slept for 3 hours, and then we came back, and we checked the brisket, and then we added the ribs, and then several hours later we would add the chicken and the beets and the tofu, and everything came out around 11 o'clock. And then at 1 o'clock is when they opened the gates. So at 1 o'clock they opened the gates. The people came in. It was completely free. They ate free barbecue, free food, free beer, free barbecue, free beer. They had a person spinning records, which is really unusual these days. It was actually spinning records instead of any kind of digital music. They were allowed to do all of the 4 interactive venues that were there. And the entire time, people were talking about brilliant machines, the industrial Internet of Things, and the medical imaging and scanning technologies at GE. That was the message that was being given. Whenever they stopped and said, "Is GE making a barbecue?" No, but let me tell you what GE is doing. Smoker experiments. So we had a little fun with the people every day. We did actually do some experiments each day. So we did experiments with chicken, doing a marinade versus a rub versus a naked chicken. We did rib experiments, low and slow versus hot and fast. And then we did a foil wrap versus the butcher paper versus the naked brisket. And the winners were the rub for the chicken, which I was a little surprised because I thought the marinade would taste better. But hands down, the rub tasted better than the marinade. The long and slow naturally cooked the ribs so that they were far tastier, juicier, far more tender than the cooking them hot and fast. And then the foil wrapped versus the butcher paper, and the no wrapping. And one of the things, if you look at this paper here, there's a couple ways that we could actually tell which one worked better. But if you look at the paper, you see how there's quite a bit of liquid around the one that's in butcher paper and the one that's in no wrap. And that's because they didn't reabsorb as much of the liquid that they lose through cooking. The one in tinfoil, it actually reabsorbed most of the fluid, and it turned out to be the most moist way that we could cook the brisket. So we cooked all of our brisket that way. And the other thing we did is that we had a public opinion poll. We had people hired that went around the crowd and took public opinion about what they thought tasted the best, and tallied them up at the end of the day, and that added into these weights of what were the most preferred results of each of those experiments. And then, more importantly, we had operational results. So what did we do with all that data? This was the most interesting part to me. And to Evan, too, as well. So, you know, Evan's on the one side down there in Austin. He's been cooking barbecue for years, learned it from his grandfather. And I'm coming down from the research center. I don't even know what the smoker looks like. No one's even told me. Everything's going to be a big surprise. I don't know what the data is going to show. I'm coming down wondering, God, what am I going to say to these people if this data shows nothing? What if it's just nothing? I have nothing to say. You know, I'm going to have to come up with something. So, you know, I'm thinking, what's the data going to do? Evan's thinking, oh my God, I never cooked in a vertical smoker. I don't know if I'm going to be able to cook meat in a vertical smoker. Well, it turns out that by getting the real-time data, it did show something. And he had no problem cooking his barbecue the way he always cooked his barbecue. But what did happen with this is he actually changed the way he ran the cooker. So he had real-time operational data about how that smoker was running, which caused him to modify the way he operated that piece of equipment. So the temperatures, for one thing, because he had the real-time temperature, instead of opening the smoker every 45 minutes and seeing if it was cooking, he didn't have to, because he knew it was cooking. He knew that each one of those chambers was at the right temperature, so instead of having to open it and let the smoke out, which is what happens, he was able to keep the smoke there at a constant rate, and he would not have to open it up, close it, and then build the smoke back up. So it got a more even smoke, and by getting a more even smoke, it gave his brisket and his ribs a more even flavor every time that he cooked them each single day. The other thing was the relative humidity. The relative humidity was hanging out at like 9, 10, 12%, and that was great. That's what we wanted. We didn't want it real humid in there. Every time, or not every time, but every now and then we'd be like, why is it 70%? What happened to the humidity? What's going on in here? Well, Evan only smokes food with oak post wood. So the oak post wood was only a year old. So anyone who has any kind of wood or burns wood for fire knows it takes about 2 years to dry out an oak tree. So this wood was not completely dry. And we would wait for it to burn down about halfway. We'd throw 5 or 6 pieces of wood on there. Turns out that the water in the wood was just evaporating really rapidly and adding humidity into the smoker. By adding the humidity, it messed up all the temperatures from the top to the bottom, and we didn't have consistent temperature anymore. So we ended up changing our feed rate and went from putting 5 or 6 pieces in it every now and then to every 30 minutes, 2 pieces of wood, 2 pieces of wood. So we had a constant temperature, constant feed rate to our fuel, which gave it a constant temperature and much less variability when we added the wood to it. So we kept the temperature at the right humidity, or we kept the chamber at the right humidity. So by him having this data, he learned how to operate that cooker much faster than he would have been able to operate that cooker without the data. And it was a successful barbecue. We cooked between 180 to 200 pounds of food a day, and in those 3 days, we fed over 3,000 people. So why is GE doing this? And so when people came up and said, is GE making barbecue pits? We'd say, no, but let me tell you about what GE is doing. So we're very interested in the industrial internet of things, as you know. So here at the bottom are our devices, and GE has a lot of devices. We have locomotives, we have airplane engines, we have turbines, we have wind turbines, gas turbines, steam turbines, generators. Oil and gas has a lot of equipment. And all of our things, we tend to build our engines now with sensors in them, so they are sensor enabled, but there's a lot of our devices that don't have sensors. A lot of our manufacturing floor equipment is not sensor enabled. So what we want to do is we want to add sensors to our devices so that we can make them intelligent devices. And then with those intelligent devices, build intelligent systems, and then use real-time and advanced analytics so that we can make intelligent decisions about those devices, those systems. We want to do optimization of our networks, our fleets, our facilities, our assets. We want to do it sometimes in real time, and more importantly, sometimes we need to make those decisions at an enterprise level, and we need to have the data to do that. And before we can do that kind of decisioning, we need to put those sensors on those devices. So a concrete example that I'm going to give you is this. We have a plant in Albany, New York. This is the plant that makes the steam turbines and generators. That plant is over 100 years old. It was Edison's site. It was Edison's plant. We call it the main plant because it's the first plant. We used smart sensors on peripheral devices of some of our legacy equipment on the manufacturing floor to be able to get insight into how those legacy pieces of equipment were working. So I'll explain what the legacy equipment is that I'm talking about. But if you look at this, this is a steam turbine, the stages of a steam turbine. And standing next to that, the person in the middle is President Obama. So you can kind of get a scale of how big the steam turbines are by looking at, President Obama, pretty tall man, pretty big steam generator, or steam turbine. This here, and when I say this here, this turquoise part, this turquoise part, all of this turquoise, this here, this ladder, all the way over to this crane, and on the other side of this crane, that is an Ingersoll Rand milling machine. That milling machine was built when the plant was built. It's over 100 years old. It doesn't have any way of giving us data into how that machine is actually running. So you can imagine by the size of that machine, what that machine does is it builds the shroud that goes over those stages of the steam turbine. So it takes two pieces of metal, it builds the shroud in two halves, and it takes one big chunk of metal and it mills it to build the shroud that goes over those stages of the steam turbine. So you can also imagine that we don't have a lot of these. We only have two. So having uptime on these is pretty critical to our business. So our business came to us and said, how can you help us get uptime on these machines, tell us how they're running so that we can reduce energy, because these things take a lot of energy. We want to reduce our energy first, and we want to reduce unplanned outages. We want to be able to schedule. Since we only have two of these, we want to know how to schedule. So what we did is we built some sensor nodes for them and added them to the peripheral devices that must be on and running when this machine is running. So we did either accelerometers or current transducers, added them to a little microcomputer. The microcomputer sent the data to a gateway. The machine gateway sent the data to the cloud, where in the cloud we analyzed the data, and then sent this back either to the desktop or to their smart devices to be able to see what that data looked like. And this is part of the machine, and so when I'm talking about adding these to the peripherals, we added them here to a coolant pump, to the small hydraulic pump, to the large hydraulic pump, hydrostatic pump, and the electronics. So we really took just plain old dumb pumps and we put smarts on them. And then analyzing that data, we were able to build models and understand how the actual milling machine was working. We were able to improve the productivity of the milling machines. They're now doing some predictive maintenance, working on scheduling and workflow, and we got energy savings right off the bat that paid for this, because these nodes were not that expensive. These nodes are about $80 each. So we provided them with some historical data, and they're using the historical data to look at things like cause and effect. They see the same thing over and over. They go back and say, why am I seeing it? What did I do last time? They are looking at the uptime of the machines, and they're looking at it by shift, which is always an interesting thing to do when you start bringing shift work into it. One shift is running better than the other. That increases productivity almost immediately. And then we are giving them email alerts if there's some sort of a notification that needs to be done. And this is where the research center, what we call a proof of concept. The next stages for this are this year. We are doing 50 more nodes at that particular plant. That is what we would call a pilot, a little bit bigger than a proof of concept. The proof of concept worked for them. They okayed the pilot. At this point next year, one of the businesses, probably Power and Water, will take it over and start building those nodes in a commercial fashion and using a commercial product to do this. But by giving this factory a new voice, right, giving these operators insight into how their machines were working, they're better able to figure out how to run their machine. And so by being better able to run that machine is the story that we talked about at South by Southwest. These factory machines were the story when they came up to me and said, Why is GE doing this? This is why GE is doing this. We have a lot of equipment that we can't get data on yet. So, that's what we're doing. We're adding these sensors to peripheral devices and trying to figure out how we can get data about how those things are running. So I have a few just thoughts to throw out there, things to maybe generate discussion if you'd like to have a discussion, because we have some time. But I keep hearing about these numbers and these connected devices and how many connected devices we're going to have. And so I looked it up because everybody's got a different number. Gartner is saying 25 billion by 2020. Morgan Stanley 75 billion by 2020. IBM says 40 billion by 2020. What are those numbers, right? I don't think, it's clear to me that really nobody understands those numbers. Nobody knows how big this is going to be. Nobody knows how many connected devices we're really going to have. Nobody really knows when all of these devices are going to get connected. But it's also pretty clear to me that big industries are moving in a way that we want to get these devices connected. We want this data. So we are eventually going to be connecting all of these devices together. It is going to happen. I'm not sure when, and I don't know how many devices, but I think it's going to happen.